This is part 4 of Methodist Christianity in a Nutshell. No, in a Nutshell series. So in 4 nutshells, we have had 3 other parts before this, and today we are ending the series with a Methodist approach to social engagement is really what we're talking about. And you'll hear different terminology today. Social engagement, social principle, social justice. Those are all things you may have heard before. We're hoping, Scott and I, to unpack that a little bit and to talk about really what would be or could be considered a Methodist approach to those things and why we use those different terms. We wanted to start today first by introducing ourselves. I'm Pastor Karen Evenson.
I'm Scott Evenson.
Scott Evenson. We have the same last name. You shared yours with me. We're together. We're married. We're husband and wife, and I'm the pastor at this church. And it is really good to be with you. The gospel of Christ knows of no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. I'm going to say that again. It's a quote by John Wesley, who is and was the founder of the Methodist movement. The gospel of Christ knows of no religion but social, no holiness but social holiness. We have, over the last several sessions, been talking about something called the general rule, or the general rule of discipleship. It's a core part of our understanding of as a denomination of who we are as Christians, as Methodists. That we've talked about it being really a practical guide for Christians to love God and neighbor together. We were talking about this in worship today, loving God and loving neighbor. This general rule makes social holiness possible in that it helps Christians to center their life together in Jesus Christ. The rule itself, which there's a picture of, and if you're watching online today, you can always access these by contacting the church office. We'll get you one sent digitally, or you can come and pick up a copy. But there's a graphic that has been on several of the graphics over these last several sessions, which outlines these 4 tenets and then within them other things. These are the general rules within a sort of encapsulated in this graphic. The rule points Christians and the congregation, ours and many others, toward the risen Christ. It leads us to join in what God is up to in the world. And God is up to some stuff in and through each and every one of us. It teaches that a Christian must participate in the world in ways that are holy and just for all of God's creation. Now that means a lot of different things to different people, because each of us have our own relationship to God, and each of us have our own relationship with ourselves and with other people. And we have a lot we bring in. Our perspectives, the things we were raised with, the things we learned along the way, the things we've practiced, and then we bring in things that have changed in our lives too. You know, we have not all come from the same upbringing or geographic area or religious understanding. Some of us came from different religious understandings, and some of us didn't have an upbringing where we were taught about Jesus and Jesus' love. But we all have been social. In one way or another. When we're in relationship, we're social. And as we're learning in this church year, in this year here at the United Methodist Church of Anoka, we are in relationship with God and with ourselves and with each other. And John Wesley says that it's all social. It's all about relationship. Holiness is social because God is social. God created human beings in his image, or in God's image, whatever name you have for God, to be relational creatures. It's not even just humans that are relational. It's not even just humans and animals that are relational. All of creation is in relationship in some way. But we humans become fully human when we share in the relationships that God initiates with us through the people that God places in our way. On our path, in our presence, right?
So social holiness is the practice of obeying Jesus' commandments to love with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, loving your neighbor as yourself and loving one another, fellow members of your local congregation as Christ loves them.
Now, the caveat to that is that we put fellow members of your local congregation. This is where we are today in a local congregation, but our beliefs go beyond that. And I think what I said in this, I printed it wrong. There's a typo, love one another, one another.
Yes.
Loving
One another,
one
one
another,
another.
one another. It
Which
was a typo, but it
okay.
works, right?
Hey, it works. It's a Trinitarian model. So it works. We love one another. They love us back. God, we love God. It's this circle.
And sometimes we don't,
Yep.
we love someone else and they don't necessarily love us back, at least in the way that we expect or we would determine as the way to love, right? Love looks lots of ways. Someone said to me after worship today, I love you. And I'm going to make a joke. So it's not true. They're like, I don't know, Scott's iffy. They were teasing. They said to me, I love you, Karen. Scott's iffy. Now they know you really well. I know. And I said, that's okay. You love me. I'll love Scott. Scott will love others. It will all work out. It was kind of a, they were like, good. She rescued my not so, my iffy joke. But it's social and we're loving one another. When Wesley says that holiness is social.
He means that the depth of your love for God is revealed by the way you love whom God loves. The writer of 1 John describes the social nature of holiness. We love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also.
Now, that's coming from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, and there are other translations which would indicate that gender is one thing in one translation and another in another. So we're talking maybe about brothers and sisters. Maybe we're talking about whole families. Maybe we're talking about people who aren't quite sure what this is all about in terms of how they identify as people. And it also uses God language that identifies God as someone in particular, like he. When we all know that being in relationship with God, we might name God in lots of different ways. That's our human way. And so just as we have our human way of interacting with that and whom we believe to be God, we have our own ways of interacting with each other too. So when we talk about the social stuff, each of us are bringing ourselves and what we bring. And that's going to look different to and for each of us. We're going to express it differently. We're going to share our social stuff differently. We're going to be social differently. And we're going to love in different ways as well.
Go ahead.
If you truly love God, this says and speaks to, and you've got all this outlined in this handout today, you must love others. In this translation of the text, it says you must love your brother and sister in Christ and your neighbor. That requires you to be in relationship. It requires you to be in relationships with the people God places alongside you in the church and the people of your neighborhood, city, and world.
And all of God's creation.
That's right. We need community.
Wesley, in one of his quotes, in one of his sermons, talks about whatever you see through a glass is God. And what he means by that is through a lens. He's speaking of glasses or spectacles, but he says whatever catches your eye, whatever comes into your vision, look at it and relate to it as if you're relating to God, because all of creation is God.
Wow, that's pretty profound, actually. It really requires that we consider what it means to be in relationship and what it means to be social, what it means to think about, to consider what lens it is we're looking through. You and I have lenses, we have glasses. You and I have glasses. My friend Michael talks about looking through a new pair of spectacles. Sometimes it might be necessary for us to say, hey, can I put your glasses on? It's not always very comfortable to put on someone else's glasses. Actually, if I put on yours, I might not like it at all. It might be really uncomfortable. But what is the lens that we're looking through? The one that we're told to be looking through is love. Yes, I do. Okay. I do see that hand over there. Ethan.
Oh, You said that all creation is God.
Yep.
So, but we're creation and we're not perfect, but God is perfect. So,
Yeah.
But we're being made perfect through God's love and grace. Yeah.
That was
Yep.
it. That was
You want to learn?
satisfactory.
You want to learn a big word, Ethan? We say that as Methodist, and I can't speak for every Methodist, but I believe those in leadership in the United Methodist Church would say that God is panentheistic. That's a big word. And it means that, it doesn't mean that God is in the world, as in God is just here in this world.
We're only here in this world.
But what it means is that the world is in God. Does that make sense to you? That God is bigger than everything that's here. So, yep.
Which is why it's so important to see through those different lenses, or recognize that we each of us see through different lenses and we bring our different perspectives. One of the things that I love about the Methodist Church and the United Methodist Church and the Methodist tradition over the years is that we are all called to bring our own perspective. It's tempting at times, I think, to think about these concepts of socialness, social awareness, social principles, social justice. We think about all that stuff, and we're tempted to do that and think about it being only our way or only one way. Even when we set things, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, we have a set of social principles that we identify with as a United Methodist Church. That's changed, and it does change regularly. Those who first put that together recognize that we would need to reconsider things as a whole, as a gathered body of people who all bring our stuff. We would need to reconsider that every so often and pretty intentionally do so. And sometimes we're all on the same page. There are many of us, as you can read in some of what we put out today, that believe as people, as human beings, as Christians, and as Methodists, that certain things just are right and wrong, or are okay or not okay, right? John Wesley believed that, and he and his people at the time, his family members, that community, the society in which they were in, and the one they created.
Let's talk a little bit about Wesley's society in which he was living. And
I would love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, United Methodist Church and many other forms of Methodism throughout the years has a long and rich history of concern for social justice. Its
Social
members,
justice.
social
That's
justice.
a term, and
Yeah.
sometimes we go, yes, I love social justice, and other times some of us have a reaction like, well, I don't even know what that is, or I think it's something in particular. But I think this is important to learn a little more about.
Its members have often taken forthright positions on controversial issues involving Christian principles. Wesley in his time was facing his own set of issues in England. This is the Industrial Revolution, the 1800s. Wesley died in 1791, but throughout his life, his church and other religious organizations were struggling with the, for lack of a better word, the social evils of their time. Things like slavery, things like animal abuse, child labor, debtors' prisons, and
you owed money, you went to prison.
And other prison issues. He spoke out against drinking and gambling and other what he saw as things that led to unhealthy lifestyles. But he also spoke to people in their workplaces. And so they talked about, what are the institutional problems we have? How are you being exploited? How is God, how can we be responsible Christians and help change some of these problems? Great Britain actually outlawed slavery long before the United States ever did. And it was, most of Europe had moved away from those slave practices long before the United States fought a civil war about it. So these were, issues during Wesley's times, and the way he organized his groups of people, because remember, this is a movement. Methodism is a movement at this time. It's not a separate religion.
Wasn't a separate denomination.
Right.
Wasn't a
right.
separate church.
Mhm.
He was a part of the Anglican Church,
Mhm.
which in the United States, we know to be the Episcopal Church or some forms of it.
Yep. But he formed these, what he called Methodist societies. And under the societies, there were different class groups. And then under the class groups, there were things called bands. So societies, classes, and bands. But they're all ways of organizing people, educating them in small groups, reading the Bible, teaching them. A lot of his sermons were preached inside these societies before they were preached to the general public. But he used this system to organize groups of people, and then those people went out and did a lot of the social justice work of the day. So they talked about these issues, and they talked about, what does this mean in light of who we say we are as Christians? How can we say that God loves all equally, and then we turn around and treat others as subhuman or not as,
Or unequally.
or unequally.
Yeah.
So he was a bit of a rabble-rouser during his time.
Well, I love that term, rabble-rouser. So what do you rabble-rouse in your life, right? So what are the things that God is calling you to?
Well, that's
What is that? We put a little history in here in terms of early Methodists, Wesley and others. Following Wesley's footsteps, early Methodists expressed their opposition to slave trade, to smuggling, to cruel treatment of prisoners. Similarly, the United Brethren Church strongly condemned slavery. In 1908, the Methodist Episcopal Church North, and there was a South, they were the first denomination to adopt a social creed, and it called for equal rights, and it called for the complete justice for all men in all stations of life. And we know that throughout history, we've had different language for those things. So it's not just men, it's all people, and they're calling for that. But they were the first to do that in terms of a denomination putting together a social creed. And then within the next decade, still this is in the early 1900s, similar statements were adopted by the Methodist Episcopal South and the Methodist Protestant Church, and the Evangelical United Brethren Church adopted a statement of social principles in 1946. And why is that important to us as Methodists? Well, because the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church joined together to become the United Methodist Church. And even we as a church have had different iterations, in fact, really most recently. And people have been deciding, like, what do I think? What do I feel? What do I believe? Well, how is it that God is calling me to be socially active, socially engaged in what I believe God would see to be justice? And that's going to look, as you see, very differently for different people based on what it is they bring. As I preached this morning, we talked a lot about how that love, God's love, true love, can bring us together, and how we need to consider, what does that look like? What is that experience like? That Jesus in the middle of, and Wesley really believed this too, that Jesus in the middle of the stuff of that time brought this reminder to everybody that no matter what is the stuff of our time, no matter what are the issues that we are experiencing in our own lives or in this nation or in this world, we still bring this message and we still act on loving God and loving others. We act on that. We do that. It's social. It is important that we do it in that way. It was in 1972 that those two came together, the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren's, right?
1968.
Oh, 68, I'm so sorry.
Yep.
In 1972, 4 years after that, the General Conference of that joining, thank you, brought a new statement, adopted a new statement of social principles. And that was revised in 1976. And by every successive Everyone after that, every general conference. So when we had during the pandemic, we had a miss, right? We missed the meeting of bringing together of people in a general conference. We missed it because there was no way that people could find to make sure that everyone's voices were brought. That every vote, every voice, every part of that would come together. So then it was delayed. However, it's part of our general rules, including the general rule of discipleship, to make sure we keep coming back to this so we don't miss something and we don't miss each other. Not like I missed you. I'm so glad to see you again. And I am. It's really good to have you back here. But in the idea that we want to make sure that we are open up to that love and whatever it looks like and how we express that in the world. Justice looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people, doesn't it?
Yep. In 2016, the United Methodist General Conference ordered a total revision of the social principles. So what they foresaw being a 4-year process of looking at the social principles that had been adopted and bringing them up to date, adding some new understandings, some new issues that they felt it was important for them to have a statement about. That ended up being an 8-year process instead. But in 2024, at this last general conference that we had in North Carolina, that revision of the social principles was brought before the general conference and was passed, I don't know, I mean, pretty
Readily.
pretty readily,
Yeah,
pretty
most
soundly.
people
Yeah,
that
I can't say it was
show.
unanimous, but those social principles, I think, they're not really church law. You wouldn't say that, this is what, if you don't follow these social principles, you're going to be thrown out of the United Methodist Church or you're going to be punished in some way.
Right, it never says that, actually.
No, but they're guidelines that we've adopted to make a statement about who we as United Methodist feel and say and claim that we will work towards these understandings of who God is and who the world is and how we treat everyone in it.
I think it's important to understand that United Methodist approach is far different than other Protestant denominations. Most of us are, even if we're not involved, are aware of the Catholic community being told what the beliefs are by the Pope and others under that Pope. So in other ways, the Lutheran Church is, so are other denominations. And the United Methodist Church is perhaps the only one, or certainly one of the only ones, that makes its social principles through laity.
That's right.
In other words, each one of us has a responsibility to contribute to the discussion about the social principles. And the meeting, when you say general conference, and that we are ordered or not ordered, there is no order that comes from the top.
No.
Because it comes from the laity.
Right.
And we are very unusual in that respect.
Correct. So the laity is each and every one of us. All of us. I am not laity anymore, but I was. I'm clergy. And when we come together as conferences, whether annually or biannually at the jurisdictional conference, not biannually, but at the jurisdictional conferences and at these general conferences, which mean the whole body of the United Methodist Church, we're coming together with clergy and laity, all having voice and vote, and everyone is invited to be part of. I think of those decisions and those expressions. So there isn't just a coming down from above kind of an order to those things, and there's not an order that you have to do it in a particular way. And it's something that I highly value as a Methodist and as a United Methodist. And we invite that pretty constantly and consistently, even within this congregation, and hopefully within all congregations of the United Methodist Church, that would be true. That you, each and every one of you and us would bring ourselves and our voice and our vote. I think that this quote is important from the Book of Resolutions. This was the 2016 Book of Resolutions. Be it resolved that That's where that comes from. We're saying that we've made this decision as a whole church body, that the United Methodist Church believes God's love for the world is an active and engaged love. A love seeking justice and liberty. We can't only be observers. We care enough about people's lives to risk interpreting God's love, to take a stand, to call each of us into a response. That's just an excerpt, and you're welcome. I've got the Book of Resolutions and the Social Principles and the Book of Discipline, all those things in my office, and you can get those things for yourselves. What I really love about this is a couple of things. We can't only be observers.
Right.
We're invited to take part, as you said.
Mhm.
We are, in fact, it's necessary that we do in order to be the Methodist Church in the ways that we have been raised from the foundations of this denomination.
Mhm.
And we risk interpreting God's love. We care enough about people's lives to risk interpreting God's love. That within other denominations and religions is not necessarily an option. There's not a lot of room for risk. Here is how we will love other people. Here is how we will see other people. Here is how we will do this. That's not how this goes in the Methodist Church. And it is risky. It means that things might come up that are hard and we need to learn to talk about them. It means that we might bring perspectives that are different. We might vote differently on different issues. It means that we don't always say the same words every week. Sent down by here is the liturgy that we all do exactly. And you know what, to be truthful, sometimes that's securing and reassuring to have a common liturgy in the Catholic Church, in the Lutheran Church, and several other denominations. My sister is part of a Lutheran church right now in another part of the world, in Germany. And she knows that when she comes here to the United States, that other than it being spoken in a different language, the liturgy is going to be the same. She knows that what was being spoken on this place and that place is going to be the same. We don't always know that here in the Methodist Church. In the United, our tradition says that we are participating, and so laity along with clergy work together to develop those words and how it is that we express ourselves in worship and socially.
Well, and that's Methodism from its very beginnings. The Methodist movement was a lay-driven movement. John Wesley was clergy, but all of those who became a part of that Methodist movement were lay people, but they were encouraged by their faith and by their time together and by the holding of each other accountable in those societies and classes, that they were compelled to go out and make this movement a part of the lives of everybody in Great Britain, and eventually it ended up in the United States. And
how are we, that accountability? We've talked about that in a different session as well. How are we attending to our life of faith, to our relationship with God? How are we attending to being together, to spending time in worship together and learning and serving together? How are we doing that? So that accountability is important. How are you serving? Are you serving? Are you reaching out? Because the way that people are doing that is going to look very different from one another. So it might be that you, and I'm pointing to you, but I'm not naming you, or you might go and bring a sign and represent something, or protest something, or support something. It might mean that you show up this week to be a host at Family Promise, one of the local services that serves families who don't have a home or shelter. It might mean that you build your business in such a way and lead your company or the place where you work in treating people fairly. It might be with how you vote or how you speak to people or serve in a kitchen, or there's so many ways, right? It might be about how you represent people, yourselves, and your family.
Can I have my phone?
Yeah, you sure can. He wants his phone, just so you know. Gonna look something up,
Well,
or actually, I
have
think you
been.
actually have it right in
Yep.
front of you.
yep. Wanted to go back. So we've been talking a lot about these social principles, and any one of you, they're printed. Are they printed in the discipline as part of the discipline?
They'll be coming
No,
out, Sean.
not yet.
I think they're gonna have them ready the 1st of January.
Okay.
It will be.
Okay.
But they're available online and we'll.
Well, I was just going to say umc.org. Any of you who have a computer, smartphone, go to umc.org, and you'll find the our social
Our
principles.
current social principles.
And I just wanted you can spend a couple of days probably reading through these at least. So
And some of
But-
them might resonate
some of them
and
might.
some of them might not. You might be put off by something you read.
Well-
Hey, I don't like, I don't like that one, or I wouldn't have voted that way at the general conference or
Right.
something. But that's where what you said, Dad, is really important to remember, is that we are the laity, the people of the church, bringing our perspectives. And this is
Mhm.
an ebb and flow. This is not
Yeah.
this is the only thing we believe. Sorry, Lori has a question.
I'm gonna speak for myself, but it is an experience both Rosalie and I have had. We were not raised in the Methodist church
Mhm.
and we were in a lot of different denominations. Not to pick on any of them because each church does have its
Mhm.
strengths and its
Absolutely.
particular mission. I didn't know the vocabulary then, but when we first started investigating the United Methodist Church, what I reacted to was that, yes, we all bear the image of God.
Mhm.
And we had been at a lot of churches where people were really worried about getting to heaven.
Mhm.
And I didn't understand why they were worried about that for their whole life, because I thought it was pretty clear.
For all.
What, that wasn't your own power, it's, the grace of God, make your decision, but what I liked about the message I heard was in the Methodist church was, instead of kingdom seekers, let's be kingdom builders here. And now I understand, that's actually the social.
That's the social
That is.
aspect of it. Exactly. There is no holiness.
Relationships here.
There is no holiness except social holiness.
Right.
That's the way we create holiness in our world. Go ahead, Ethan.
We still want to do our part.
Absolutely.
And we need to do our part.
Mhm.
And that's the really important thing here, is this is the deal. Participate, do, represent, be, contribute.
So I just wanted to go through the titles. When you go through the social principles, you'll find there's a preface to the social principles. There's a preamble. There's a statement on community in all of creation. So we were talking earlier about God is a part of all creation. And so what is our relationship as United Methodists to all of God's creation? There's a part on the economic community. So how do we view economic justice in the United Methodist Church?
And as the beginnings of that, it talks about that all that we have belongs to God.
Mhm.
And that is a collective belief that we have said that we hold as Methodists, that even though we work and we earn and we represent and we are trusted with
Mhm.
this, it all is God's. And so we use it for that purpose.
So, she was right about not worrying about how to get to heaven, but we still should examine ourselves daily.
Mhm.
We examine ourselves daily. That's exactly
Examine.
right. You've been listening to the Wesley way.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So economic community, there's a statement on the social community. This is where you'll find most of the statements on how does the Methodist Church view things like family and marriage. And some of this, like Lori said, is being updated after the last general conference. They have, they passed the revised social principles, but they haven't printed them.
Yeah.
So
I think what's online is
Is
the
it?
revised one.
Okay.
It's just the print version hasn't.
Okay,
There's a delay.
Got it. So, and then there's a statement on the political community. And then finally, it ends with our social creed.
I think that the piece on the political community in this week where we are thinking a lot about politics, as we have in this last few months especially, it makes a statement about that we honor the basic freedoms and rights of all human beings and protect God's creation.
Mhm.
That's the pre part of that. So there'll be more to speak to that. And again, that looks a little different in each of
Mhm.
our communities and each of our lives in terms of how that plays out. But that our basic principle is that we honor and respect all people.
Yeah.
Basic freedoms and rights of all human beings.
So does that mean you have to agree with everybody? No. Yeah. It's about honoring the basic freedoms and rights of everybody. So you don't have to agree with them, but you have to be respectful, and you have to engage in conversation in a holy and grace-filled way with everyone.
So at the bottom of this handout, the question that was posed is, what does having social principles as a Christian mean to you? Or mean to you, is I think how I italicized it. And you don't need to share that right now, but it is something for reflection and consideration. You shared, Lori, thank you, because it means something when we come to a place, to a church, to a community, to a perspective that on which we're reflecting, that we think about what is having social principle, what is having principles in some way mean to us. And we have some lively discussions about these things in this church community in various settings, in book studies and Bible studies, and after worship in the community room, in the fellowship hall as we're joining together, and then in individual conversations along the way. But it's in these self-reflections that we can bring ourselves to this conversation. So what is this going to look like for me as a Christian, for me as a Methodist? Likely, the way you live out your faith looks different from the way your neighbor does, and it can still be holy and loving. Our social engagement is the way that we are engaged and the way we engage others, the way we get involved, the way we consider who it is that we are and who it is that God has created all to be. And so we are engaged in relationship with God and with others. We're engaged in what it is and who it is that we are.
Well, this, I think, end our presentation with the paragraph. This is the last paragraph from the preamble of our social principles. Recognizing that God is our creator, redeemer, and sustainer, we seek to center our lives and witness on God. We are confident that nothing can separate us from the grace of God, and that the social witness of the church is a testimony to that grace. With God's help, we pledge to share ministry and honor everyone's dignity, even when we disagree, to seek the mind of Christ and to follow God's will in all things.
And that is from this updated 2020
Yep.
2020 and 2024 Book of Disciplines. That's who we are. And that's what we have today
So,
for you.
questions
I have had
or
discussions with
statements?
some people that would challenge some of this, because what about worship? What about prayer? What about the self-introspection? What about all the things that are holy in you? And I would suggest, and what I suggest to others, is that that's all there.
It's all there.
And
Yep.
that's all part of Wesley's message,
Mhm.
is
Yep.
that the personal relationship with God is right there.
It's social.
But then
Yep.
next, there are some other things. I mean, the groups they got together with weekly, they shared communion, they prayed, they did all these things, and
Yeah.
then they asked each other, what have you done this week?
Yeah.
What have you done this week? And what are you gonna do with this?
Right.
What are you gonna do now that
Mhm.
you've heard about this, now that you've experienced this, now that you've engaged in this other?
Wesley talked about the means of grace, and those 4 means of grace. I think there's actually 5 now, but at any, well, I think they added something else, but there are works of mercy, acts of justice, acts of compassion, acts of devotion, and acts of worship. So those 4 acts are what Wesley says, that's what you have to include in your life to be seeking be called a disciple of Christ and to be called a child of God.
Engage.
Yep.
Engage in those
So-
things, and personally and beyond yourself with others.
You can't have one without the other.
You can't have one without
If you're
the
not
other.
if you're not feeding yourself, you're not going to be able to feed anybody else.
Rhonda.
Question, so are these acts and these social justice and uh economic justice and stuff, is that what makes the United Methodist, that physical engagement and doing that?
It's a part of what makes us who we are.
Mhm.
It's this social engagement with, it's this, that we're in relationship with God and with each other
Mhm.
and with the world.
I'm a little confused. I came from Motley and they had a Free Methodist and a
Ah.
United Methodist.
So
It's an oxymoron.
yeah, well, so yeah,
Let me explain the oxymoron
Yeah,
comment.
no,
The
no.
Free Methodist Church was mentioned, and there are more things that would come
Right,
out in
right.
terms of like, this is the way we do them. Yeah.
it's not like free range Methodists where they're just out doing, on their own, living in the wild. No, the Methodist movement, it's gone through a number of different shapes and forms and transformations over the year. At the end of
The
the
years.
over the years, at the end of the 1800s, 19th century, there was something called the holiness movement.
Mhm.
And this holiness movement came out of Methodism. And a lot of those other denominations
And expressions of
and
Methodism.
expressions of Methodism were formed at that time. So there are things like Free Methodists, there are
Episcopal Methodist Church.
Episcopals.
There are.
Well, the Nazarenes are as an offshoot of the Methodist church, Methodist movement.
And
The
others.
Pentecostal church actually has its origins in Methodism. So, but by the time of and even before, but by the time of the 20th century, Methodism, or Methodist Episcopal Church North and the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and
words.
the Protestant Methodist Church were the 3 largest denominations that held onto that core of Methodism. And they became very much concerned in following their roots in social justice movements, so much so that during the early 20th century, we started to talk about the different branches of the Protestant church. The Protestant church being everything that really wasn't Catholic for the most part. And so, those churches like the Methodist Church, in particular, that Methodist Church in particular became really the social justice engine that was driving a lot of what was going on in the early part of the 20th century in the Christian movement in the United States.
So there are lots of different expressions of it.
Mhm.
And as I was saying, even within our own current expression or expressions of that, there's a little difference or a lot difference in
Mhm.
different places.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
2 phrases I've been seeing the different agencies use in the last 6 months of basically, and I can't remember which has come out of COSRA, which has come out of Discipleship Ministries, all the different agencies of the United Methodist Church. It's been interesting to know common good, thinking about what's for the common good,
Yep.
and also grace over greed.
Mhm.
Grace over greed and what is for the common good. And those follow really what we just heard Scott read, and
Yeah.
follows what it is that we're called to think about and reflect on, both personally and collectively.
And Coswell, will you tell us what,
Right.
for those who
Cosgrove
don't know?
Committee and Status on the Role of Women. These are acronyms that are part of, it's one of the parts of our United Methodist Church as it is.
Maybe not just social justice, but the United Methodist Church is known for acronyms.
So, yeah, social.
We like our
Methodist
acronyms.
Church is known for acronyms. That's-
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
We have a bunch of them.
one of the biggest social justice organizations within the United Methodist Church is UMCOR.
UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief. And it is not a committee that simply sits around a table. It is the work of the people. So when you see that acronym UMCOR, and we say, here's what's happening with UMCOR, if you want to contribute to it financially, or if you want to get involved as a volunteer. You may have heard me speak about UMCOR in worship before. It is another one of my favorite expressions of social justice, because UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, being the people who plan and run it, but all the people of the church, clergy, laity alike, who can get involved and respond immediately following a whole bunch of needs, and particular disasters. So the floods or the fires or the tornadoes or in times of war. American Red Cross is often the first. The Red Cross, even if it doesn't put American in front of it, the Red Cross is often the first one, and they help immediately in the first weeks, days, weeks, months, hours, and so on. UMCOR, a lot of people in the world don't realize it, but typically they're second on the ground and they stay for up to 10 years or more. That's part of the work of the United Methodist Church, to bring dignity, love, care, grace to all. We stay to get involved and to not just be involved in the community, but to help repair and strengthen communities physically and otherwise. So a lot of mission groups that I've been with have been on trips for UMCOR after Superstorm Sandy. When we went out almost a year after that on the coast of New Jersey and New York and all along that area, there were others who had been there and been doing a lot of work. We came in, myself and other adults, actually it was a conference trip we organized here in this Minnesota conference, came in, stayed in a local church that had otherwise been gutted because it had been so flooded out that the church wasn't worshiping there at that time anymore. Stayed on cots, ate our meals together, and we got to know the people in the neighborhood around. And UMCOR was the structure that helped us, the organizational structure that helped us to know how to continue to help and build and paint and clean out and pull out those places and homes and lives that had been really gutted, flooded, but also the garbage that was still there and the things like that, and then to rebuild. And then the organization UMCOR stays involved for many, many years to make sure that no one is left out and that it's really strengthened. And I speak to that a lot to say that there are lots of ways to express social justice, right? To go in and to help in the moment is one thing. To go in and to stay beyond speaks to a lot of us, right? And on an All Saints Day, and I think this will be we'll have to wrap up for now. But on All Saints Day, we're remembering those lives that went before us. And those of us who have experienced loss in our lives, we know that in those hours and days and weeks and months following the loss of someone in our lives, people attend to us. And then after that, right, then there's what comes next. It's all of the months and years beyond that, when we still need care and attention and so on. So if you've experienced that, you might understand that there's a need to go beyond the immediate and to stay involved. That's what UMCOR does, and that's what we're called to do in whatever area of life. So we might be with somebody in their circumstance. We might go out to a parade or we might protest something, or you might support something, or you might give to something. We're called to think about how it is that we will do that over and over and over again in whatever ways we're called. It might be individuals, supporting them in who they are and how they identify to be themselves as created people of God. So we're called to be socially engaged. And the gospel of Christ knows of no religion but social, and no holiness but social holiness.